Are Kanye's rants about his very public divorce just celebrity gossip or part of something we really need to talk about? So for more on this, we welcome to CP24 Tonight once again pop culture writer Stacey Lee Kong from FridayThings.com and social worker and psychotherapist Katie Gillis. She provides training on recognizing patterns of domestic violence and family trauma and helping survivors move forward. Thanks to both of you. Stacey, let's start with understanding the narrative here. Trevor Noah suggesting this isn't just celeb gossip anymore. This is serious, he says. So when did we begin to see the rhetoric around this story really change?
So I think we've actually seen this almost from the time that they broke up, but I really started paying attention at the end of 2021 and into January, where Kanye really started to call out his relationship with Kim. And even as he was sort of doing different things in his personal life, he was dating other people, he would keep returning to this narrative of he wants to get his family back together. So the first thing we saw was that he used his kids and access to his kids as a way to kind of control Kim Kardashian. So he wanted to be able to see them, and he was criticizing her for keeping them away from him. And we heard that he bought a house across the street so that he would be able to co-parent more effectively. And then since then, it's just continued escalating.
So Katie, let's bring you in on this. I mean, how common is using your children as leverage in this kind of situation where there's a domestic disagreement?
So it's so common. Anything that the target or that the victim loves, so employment is very common, using children is very common because it's a way to just exert that control back and also honestly payback too. It gives payback because you're creating the chaos in their life with the things that they love and the people that they love.
So in your assessment, watching from afar with your expertise in mind, is Kim Kardashian in danger?
So I'm always telling people, imagine Kim is any person. Kim right now, of course, she's one of the richest people in the world. And so, yes, I do think she's in danger. And I think that she represents so many people who maybe don't have the money to protect themselves. I mean, if anyone can protect themselves, it would be someone who has a lot of money. Of course, with money comes power and privilege, of course. But so many people don't have that. And so, yes, she is in trouble. She is, because what's happening is it's not stopping and it's escalating and it's following a pattern.
That's an important point, Stacey. What does it say that someone as rich, as famous, as successful as Kim Kardashian is going through this?
I mean, I think to Katie's point, this is happening to so many women. And if we are going to take anything away from Kim Kardashian's experience, I think it has to be that money and power and privilege are not actually going to protect you if an abusive ex just wants to continue harassing you and maybe even escalating to physical violence.
So, Katie, what can we learn from this moment about leaving maybe a toxic relationship, about how to best protect yourself?
So I'm really happy that we're normalizing this conversation of post-separation abuse, because before now, society, we really only view domestic abuse really in a physical lens. And so much of post-separation abuse and so much of domestic violence is not the physical part. It's things like this where the victim is they don't know where to turn and they feel isolated because the law and the courts, they don't know what to do because there are so few laws. And a lot of times what happens is people like Kanye, they are operating in that gray area of the law where they're not walking right up to you and putting their hands on you. They're staying in that gray area where law officials don't know, can we stop them? Can we not? Is this stalking? Is it harassment? Is it not? And so I always tell people, normalizing the conversation, stop ignoring it, stop seeing it as just normal breakup stuff, and just educating.
So is there a point where cyberbullying maybe turns into something more sinister, more dangerous than that? What are some of the red flags where you should actually take notice?
So whenever someone is telling you what they're going to do, and he has, I mean, the video that he's posted, about her new partner and things like that. When people come out and they say, oh, I'm going to hurt this person, or even alluding to it, believe them. Please believe them, because why not? Why take that chance? So we really need to believe them. We really need to start, decreasing the amount of power that people have and the amount of power that perpetrators have because they're excused so much and their behavior is excused so much by social circles and by the law and courts.
Stacey, from a public opinion perspective, Kanye now pulled out of the Grammys over this. How meaningful is that?
I think it is really meaningful because so far we've had really actually kind of strange conversations around Kanye. So if you've been paying attention to what he's been posting, you'll see that in his comment section, a lot of people at the very beginning, especially, were talking about how romantic it was and how he just wants to reunite with his family. There's also this other side of the conversation where, and Trevor Noah also made this point, that these are celebrities and why does it matter and why should we care? So I do think it's interesting that it took until he threatened Trevor Noah before there were some kind of like structural or institutional changes. But either way, I think it's important that this happens. And I kind of actually want to push back on, so Trevor tweeted about this when the news broke that Kanye had been uninvited from performing. And he said, I wanted people to counsel Kanye, not cancel Kanye. And I want to push back on the idea that what's happening is a cancellation. So obviously, first of all, cancel culture is not a real thing. What we're seeing is the consequences of Kanye is facing the consequences of his actions. But even more than that, and I fully admit that it's a little ironic that I'm having this conversation, but I think we actually have to look away from Kanye a little bit. So Kim Kardashian shouldn't, and her security team shouldn't. But in general, he's empowered to continue behaving this way because we're all paying attention. And if we look away, I think that's the kindest thing that we can do for him, but also a way to sort of remove some of his power so that Kim Kardashian and her children remain safe.
A very fascinating point, Stacey. We will have to leave it there for tonight. Stacey Lee Kong and Katie Gillis, thanks so much for your time and your perspective tonight.
Now things are starting to make sense. Now we understand why the NDP have been so eager to prop up the Liberals and their unethical behavior. It's because they have been cooking up a secret backroom deal. My question to the leader of the new NDP Liberal Party is this. When did he start these secret talks with his new Deputy Prime Minister, the member for Burnaby South? Was it before, during, or just after the last election?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
What this agreement means is in this time of uncertainty and pressures on Canadians, we're going to have predictability and an ability to focus on delivering the things that Canadians asked us all for collectively in the last election. More investments in housing, better support for families, help with the cost of living, growth for Canadians, the fight against climate change increased, and support on reconciliation. The toxicity and polarization that we'd seen in Parliament of the past is now an opportunity for us to deliver for Canadians, and that's what we shall do.
Interim Conservative Party leader Candice Bergen taking on the Prime Minister during question period today, saying Canadians did not vote for an NDP government and accusing the NDP and Liberals of backdoor dealings. This after the two parties struck a blockbuster deal that would keep Justin Trudeau's Liberal minority in power until 2025. The NDP and Liberal Party leaders say this would provide stability to Canadians. This includes action on dental care, climate change, housing, and paid sick leave. For analysis, we welcome to CP24 Tonight Muhammad Ali, Liberal strategist and senior consultant at Crestview Strategy, Kim Wright, NDP strategist and principal at Wright Strategies, and John Capobianco, conservative strategist and senior VP and partner at Fleischman Hillard High Road. Thanks to all of you. Mohammed, let's start with you. Talk about the timing of this deal. Why now? I mean, Trudeau, they're talking about this sense of uncertainty right now. Could we really have seen another election before 2025?
Look, it's a minority parliament, so an election could take place at any given moment if government loses confidence of the House. Now, I think there's a number of factors at play here. I know the word unprecedented has been probably overused over the last 2 years, but this is an unprecedented time. There is significant geopolitical instability given the Russian invasion of Ukraine, high inflation, the pandemic's ongoing, we have supply chain concerns. There is far too much going on. And I think this was a strategic decision amongst both parties, but particularly for the Liberals and the government, to create an opportunity that establishes continuity and certainty over the next budgets, the next 3 budgets, and that establishes kind of continuity for them to get through their election platforms, achieve some of their critical policy objectives on climate change, digital reconciliation, and housing. And a lot of what was already agreed upon was stuff that was in the platform. So aside from dental care, there was largely all the same. So this is a big win for the Liberal government to achieve continuity and stability over the next 4 years for them.
A big win for the Liberal government. Kim, a lot of people saying Trudeau, the bigger winner here. Your thoughts on that?
Look, I think Canadians can be and should be seeing themselves as the bigger winner here. They have set back-to-back minority governments, expecting politicians to get over their own egos, stop playing temper tantrum politics, and actually get to work for what matters to Canadians. And over 50% of Canadians voted for either the Liberals or the New Democrats. You know, this line that Canadians didn't vote for an NDP government, I'll tell you, I certainly did. And this is what I expected. I expect movement, tangible movement on dental care, not just more promises, but actual movement on this, movement on pharmacare, movement on affordable housing. Anybody who has tried to rent an apartment anywhere in this country, let alone here in Toronto, and tried to find it at an affordable rate, has been woefully disappointed. The precarious housing situation that we have with our homeless populations, the need for wraparound services for various vulnerable communities, including all of our mental health coming out of the pandemic. These are key issues that Canadians have been looking for movement on. And we also saw in this deal an enshrinement of the childcare deals. Here in Ontario, we still don't have a childcare deal struck with the federal government, even though every other province and territory seems to. But what it will do is make sure that these were not only promises and ribbon cuttings, but actually moved into actual movement where people can actually access the service, and not just when the whim of a political party feels like it. People sent the New Democrats to work to make Parliament work. What they did today isn't unprecedented. Tommy Douglas did this to get us Medicare. Jack Layton did it to get us affordable housing, and Jagmeet Singh did it to get us a whole heck of a lot of things today.
What we can't deny is some of these policies are going to be expensive. How do you respond, Kim, to some of the concerns about cost?
So that's an easy one. The reality is governing is choosing. And when you look at the budgets of the federal government, there is a lot of money within the system that can be allocated or properly allocated to make sure that these priorities are paid for. But even if we look at dental care, first of all, many people who have gotten to severe dental problems end up in the ER, which is exponentially more costly to the entirety of the healthcare system. So if we can start to get at these issues earlier, it means more money in the pocket of Canadians. Also, people having better access to overall healthcare services, because as we know, the mouth is the starting place for so many health problems. So if we just look at that, there's a lot of savings that can be done by putting these allocations into the right place. As an old boss of mine says, put your emphasis in the right place. But what we're looking at is what matters to Canadians here, and that's what we look through in the billions and billions and billions of dollars that the federal government spends each year. If we can't find it for healthcare, we've got bigger problems.
All right, John, a fiery question period today following this announcement. Conservatives blindsided and really upset.
Well, I think Canadians were blindsided. I think Candace Bergen, the interim leader, said it right when he said that the Liberals and the NDP cooked up the secret deal behind closed doors, and there was an expectation, obviously, given the fact that the NDP have been supporting the Liberals not only during this parliamentary session, but for the last number of parliamentary sessions. And look, I think at the end of the day, none of the policy issues that both Kim and Mohammed talked about this deal, being something of a revelation that these are going to happen, they were going to happen regardless. Now, notwithstanding the fact that pharmacare and dental weren't mentioned in the Liberals' platform this time around, but the Liberals have mentioned both pharmacare and dental in some ways. The NDP have always espoused it. But this is something that is purely a power grab for the Liberals. And look, no one believed that there was going to be an election this year or next year or even potentially the year after. The NDP were more than happy to support the Liberals over the course of the last little while. They did with the Emergency Act, and they were going to do it again in the next budget. So at the end of the day, this is a big win for the Liberals. And the Canadians will lose because it's now spending will go through the roof. And when we were supposed to be talking about economic recovery post-pandemic, that's not going to happen now. So a lot of these issues and a lot of the things that we've just seen with this deal that has happened is going to make the Liberals now sort of secure for the next 3 or 4 years. And I think it's going to be a significant, it's a short-term gain for Jagmeet Singh for sure. He's going to get the press and all that for the next week or two. But long term, I think it's going to hurt Jagmeet Singh because at the end of the day, the Liberals are going to be the ones that are going to be putting forward all these legislations and the policies. And Canadians will be remembering them in the next election, not the NDP, the fact that the NDP propped them up.
Okay, Kim, why don't you respond to that? I mean, where does this leave the NDP? Do you share that concern this may, sort of position the Conservatives as a more clear alternative to the Liberals?
No, Jagmeet Singh and the New Democrats actually, as part of this deal, have an oversight agreement, which means that they're actually going to, shockingly, talk to the government, making sure that the issues that matter to Canadians are part of this conversation. They're going to have many conversations about what comes forward in legislation. Frankly, it is what should happen in a minority parliament, that the government should talk to the opposition parties. And if the Conservatives want to talk about how many times they've propped up the Liberal government, including voting against pharmacare and dental care, there are 600 times in the last parliament and this parliament that they've supported the Liberal government. So, when we talk about these things, what Jagmeet Singh and the New Democrats have focused on are getting deals that matter to Canadians, not playing brinksmanship politics and temper tantrum politics as the Conservative Party has done. And look, I like a good band name as much as anybody else, but Candice Bergen calling this backdoor socialism is kind of ridiculous.
So, Mohammed, what does all this say about where the Liberal Party is right now? Is it moving more left? And is there a risk that this could further politicize the country and polarize people in the country?
You know what? I think, we've all of my fellow panelists have all knocked on doors, and the number one message always is, can government get something done? Is your party going to get something done? And I'm tired of waiting. It takes forever. Well, this is an agreement that helps get things done. Regardless of whether the NDP may or may not have supported the Liberals over the next 4 budgets and over the entire mandate, the minority parliament only lasts normally 18 to 24 months. So it's not like there's a lot of time to get through things. And this government has committed on some ambitious targets. And this agreement ensures that also represents with 2 parties that got over 50% of the popular vote in the country. They are representing Canadians for what they want. I mean, the Liberals ran a platform and won, and they're enacting their platform. So there is not some sort of backroom socialism deal that the Conservatives are going to accuse the deal to be. It's strictly Parliament working. And Canadians want Parliament to work, get things done, get us out of this pandemic, get us in economic recovery, and address the situations that are impacting Canadians every day. That's going to be done in this upcoming budget, and that will be done over the next 4 years on key issues that matter to Canadians on their pocketbooks and just being able to afford a house or get medication.
On a local level, we are just months away from an election here in Ontario. John, could this deal help Doug Ford?
Well, I think it does help Doug Ford. I think that there's always been the issue of whatever the federal political situation was, that it'd be the opposite in Ontario. So in other words, if there was a federal Liberal government in Ottawa, there'd be a provincial Conservative government here in Ontario. So now the fact that the Liberals and the NDP have teamed up to be the center-left government now in Ottawa, I think does help the Premier, because I think Ontarians will want to see some sort of a balance, because they're going to see the federal government and the Liberal NDP government in Ottawa spending through the roof. So there's going to have to be some check and balance, and having a Conservative government in Ontario will probably be that check and balance. So I think it helps the Premier. It's never a set in stone with respect to this kind of thing, but you could imagine that the province, especially over the course of the next little while, are going to need to work with the federal government. And having the federal government being the Liberals and the NDP in Ottawa might very well help the Premier.
We'll have to see how this plays out. Thanks so much for your time and your perspective tonight. Muhammad Ali, Kim Wright, and John Capobianco, thanks so much.
Girls in Afghanistan have been waiting months to go back to school after the Taliban took back full control of the country. Today, their hopes and dreams were shattered. The Taliban closed schools hours after they reopened, backtracking on their decision to keep secondary schools open for girls. Now, female students above the 6th grade will not be able to learn in a classroom. To talk more about this disturbing development, we're joined live tonight by Nuria Cameron, co-founder of Children Without Borders, and Naqib Sarwai, activist and board member at Children Without Borders. Thank you both for being with us. Nuria, we'll begin with you. Girls in Afghanistan, they were seen crying after they were promised their schools would reopen today, only for the Taliban to lock them out again at the very last minute. I mean, this was so sudden. What do you make of this heartbreaking development?
Hi, Lena. First of all, thank you for having us and giving us the opportunity to voice our concerns. Today was actually a very heartbreaking day for all of us, not just at CWB, but as a nation and as a country, because these girls, especially the girls that are enrolled in our long-term programs, our focus has always been to give them access to education. And today, when they went back to school, they were in school for about 2 to 3 hours, and they were told to go back and not to return back from grade 6 to grade 12. So not only they were heartbroken, but they saw their dreams shatter. And so they saw their dreams shattered. And this is something that we don't take it lightly. And we're hoping that the Canadian government can assist us and help us in getting these girls back in school to prosper and to be to have their basic rights given back to them.
And I want to come to you next, Naqib. The Taliban issued a statement on Monday saying that schools would reopen. Is there an explanation here? How are Afghans trying to understand what happened, and what are the explanations they're coming up with here?
Actually, it came as a shock to a lot of people, yet not surprising. Unfortunately, the Taliban have had a history of breaking their promises. Last time when they were in government, when I was at school, probably grade 1, it took them 6 years to come with a plan. So what they use as an excuse this time that they don't have a proper plan yet to open schools, whether it's the school uniforms for the girls or any other excuse. Unfortunately, there is no explanation to why they're not doing. If they don't have the uniforms, it shows their incompetency on being able to organize the schools, to organize the curriculum, which shows their lack of readiness actually in this. For a lot of girls, I have had a lot of sad days, Lena, in my life. Unfortunately, today is perhaps the saddest day in my life because it's a human rights aggression. It's a cruelty of human rights that the Afghan girls are facing, unfortunately.
Nuria, access to education, that's a human right. Every person should have that right. What does this sudden reversal mean to young girls in Afghanistan who just want to learn? What are you hearing from the girls in your program?
First of all, we're hearing obviously all of the girls, not just the girls, their siblings are sad for them, especially their brothers, that they're able to be in school, they're able to get education, but their sisters are not allowed. So they feel the inequality as well as the unfairness. We saw a lot of, I'm sure everybody saw a lot of videos that are circulating on social media. Girls, they don't feel members of their communities anymore. They don't feel they have a voice. The last 6-7 months have been there have been a lot of instabilities in Afghanistan, but the Taliban had promised that the girls will be able to go back to school and they will have a chance to equality. But today, actually, that dream shattered. And the girls in our program, they wanted to be doctors, they wanted to be engineers or even journalists, and they don't feel they can accomplish that anymore.
Naqib, is there anything Children Without Borders can do here? How is your organization trying to help?
Our organization is a totally volunteer-led organization, Lena. There's only so much we can do, but we are trying our best to work with international organizations, to put pressure on them, to mobilize support within our Canadian society from individuals, ordinary individuals, to pressure the Canadian government, broader the international community, human rights organizations, the United Nations. We are a small call. We are trying to create a petition online to push for this. There's a donor meeting happening in the near future. I think within the 10 days, that the international community will give the promised amount of donations to the Afghan to the Afghan government. This is a time not only for Children Without Borders to step up, it's time for everybody to step up. It's a violation of human rights for one person in one corner of the world is unfortunately a violation of rights for everybody all around the world.
And there has been so much reaction from the international community condemning this surprise reversal. Nouri, this comes days before an international donor conference that aims to raise over $4 billion to help the desperate humanitarian crisis in your country. And Nakeeb was just talking about the aid that Afghanistan needs so badly right now. The U.S. and other donor governments have cut off humanitarian support, saying if the Taliban wants to be taken seriously as a government, it has to give women and girls access to education. How could this move change the kind of aid the country receives? Are you worried about that?
Of course, we're worried about it. Initially, when the fallout of the government happened, we were worried about poverty. Our mission at CWB has been eradicating child labor, but we had to shift our vision a little because we're fighting poverty. But now with the girls' education and for the girls not having access to education, we're more focused on the girls being back in school, as well as I'm sure that, we lost a lot of our donors when this happened. So we do see that as our mission being affected as well.
Okay, we'll leave it there. And Nouria Cameron and Nakeeb Sarwai, thank you so much for all of this perspective tonight. We certainly appreciate your time.
Thank you so
Lena,
much
for having us.
I just want you to know that the alliance can save Ukrainian lives from Russia's strikes, from Russia's occupation, if we can get all the weapons we need.
President Volodymyr Zelensky made this request to NATO members on what is a grim milestone. Today marks 1 month since Russia invaded Ukraine. On February the 24th, Russian President Vladimir Putin made the declaration of what he called a special military operation. Putin said the goal was the, quote, demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine. And so today, NATO member states convened in Brussels with the organization offering up more military support. But is it enough? Let's hear first.
We will be sending more lethal equipment to Ukraine in the coming days and weeks, as we've committed to do. We're going to continue to try and help out in the best possible way we can.
We're looking at what we can do to help, but I've got to tell you, logistically at the moment, it looks very difficult, but both with armour and with jets. We're very conscious of what he's asking for.
Okay, world leaders conscious of what President Zelensky is asking for, and they have elaborated a bit on what they're offering. But is this support enough? 1 month into this conflict. Joining us now are CTV's military analyst, retired Major General David Fraser, and Tina J. Park, Junior Fellow at the Bill Graham Center for Contemporary International History at the University of Toronto. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight. I'm going to start with you, Major General Fraser. President Zelensky has asked NATO member states for high-end military equipment. He says his country urgently needs tanks, aircraft, anti-ship missile systems. Canada has provided things like machine guns, handguns, ammunition. Is this an appropriate response from Canada so far, considering our donation stock is low?
Well, Christina, I mean, there's a big ask from President Zelensky. He's asking for a lot more than what NATO, including Canada, is prepared to give. And simply put, it's that NATO doesn't want to have this war expand outside the confines of Ukraine. And Putin has actually indicated what he's prepared to accept and not accept. But, there is a line in the sand today that wasn't there yesterday, and that's on the use of chemical weapons. And the president has indicated that he will respond in kind to Russia if he does that. But fundamentally, Ukraine will get all the resources that they need. At this moment in time, it will not include a no-fly zone, aircraft, or probably tanks.
Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about that no-fly zone, retired Major General, in a moment. But, Tina, I want to elaborate on something the General talked about, NATO's role. As you know, NATO's military role includes the peaceful resolution of disputes and, in a situation of crisis management operations. Is what President Zelensky, what he's asking for, beyond NATO's mandate and role?
Well, yes, I think Mr. Zelensky is very desperate for more weapons and more help, and he has been calling for no-fly zone, for instance, which is really beyond the scope of what NATO is able to provide. We have to remember that NATO is a defensive alliance, and NATO's responsibilities for collective defense really extends to the member states. That said, I think we've seen a remarkable degree of solidarity and support from all NATO member states when it comes to supporting Ukraine through humanitarian, economic, and political means. And I think the alliance will continue to help people of Ukraine promote their territorial integrity and defend their freedom. But we have to be very careful to not escalate this conflict into another war at a global scale that, frankly, nobody is ready to sort of deal with at this point.
Yeah, it appears to be a very cautious approach and appropriate approach when you consider NATO's role and that request for a no-fly zone, which President Zelensky has pressed NATO and its member states for time and time again. He continues to get a no answer to that. Tina, we don't anticipate that will change because President Vladimir Putin has warned that any move to create a no-fly zone above Ukraine would be viewed as participation in the conflict. So would you agree that this is going to be a consistent no?
Absolutely. I think when you impose a no-fly zone, you have to be willing to shoot down the enemy's plane. And if we were to shoot down Russian planes from the NATO's end, that is seen as a declaration of war by the Russian side. And I think that is the last thing we want. Ceasefire is in everybody's interest, including Russia's, because we're seeing a continued escalation of conflict on the ground, and the refugee crisis in Ukraine is at a level that we have not seen since the Second World War. So countries like Poland have stepped up, and certainly all European countries have welcomed Ukrainian refugees, and I think Canada will do the same. But there are clear limits to the humanitarian capacity that the international community has. So the longer the conflict lasts, the more difficult it will be for everybody involved, and we really have to resort to diplomatic and political solutions for putting this crisis to an end.
And here, yet we are a month in. Major General, President Biden today was asked about the potential for the use of chemical weapons. He would not elaborate, of course, on what intelligence the U.S. has. Jens Stoltenberg, NATO's Jens Stoltenberg, has agreed to provide Ukraine with greater support in the event of a chemical, biological, or nuclear attack. He says NATO has activated their own defenses. What does that mean?
Well, Christina, there's a couple of things. First of all, there is a team in Washington working on what would happen if Russia did launch a chemical or biological attack. And the president, let's be clear, the president just said today that if Russia did that, they would get attacked by the West, and it would be proportional, and he was not going to give anything more than that. And that is probably the strongest statement that we've heard from the President of the United States, and that is directed at Putin. So, in fact, the line in the sand has been given. So that should actually push Putin back into its box. The other thing is there's 100,000 Americans now sitting in Europe. 40,000 of the NATO reaction force is gone, 4 additional battle groups. NATO has got, as we would say in the military, stood to with all their weapons pointed at Russia. So Putin has now got a whole bunch of guns pointed at his head, and he's got a line in the sand that if he fires those unmentionable weapon systems, it's going to hurt him badly.
What about the role of international troops in terms of the support being provided by troops from the West? We heard NATO's Jens Stoltenberg say today, as much as NATO member states and NATO as an organization is willing to provide support, it's not peacekeeping in the sense that we will see troops move into Ukraine. Is that something that we would see at some point? And if so, when, Major General?
The short answer is no. NATO is a defensive force. Everything that's been done today has been proportional, non-escalatory. It will be a persistent presence, but it's about 140,000 plus troops now that are on the border between NATO and Russia as a deterrent. And after the Russian performance in Ukraine so far, Russia would be absolutely silly to try to come into NATO because NATO would destroy them. So right now, this is a defensive measure, but there are also indications of Russia, if they did anything else, of what the United States would do to them.
Tina, on that note, President Zelensky warning today that Russia poses a threat to NATO nations in Eastern Europe. Is that something you would consider to be an accurate and imminent threat?
Well, I think it's up for discussion, actually, because NATO has strengthened our eastern flank since the latest Russian invasion of Ukraine. And we certainly have NATO member states surrounding Ukraine who may be exposed if Russia decided to expand. But I think Russia is also aware, Mr. Putin is certainly aware that any attack on a NATO member state will be an attack against all of us. And that really escalates the level of confrontation to a different level. And should it become a very global sort of attack on the alliance, then NATO will respond accordingly. We have already seen strengthening of our eastern flank, and NATO is certainly very much interested in protecting the territorial integrity of member states. So I think there is a lot at stake, and all parties are aware of what is at stake.
And Major General, if we can end it with you here. We started off this discussion asking, is what Canada offering, is what the international community, specifically the NATO member states, what they're offering, is it enough? Because we continue to see from these nations, yes, the promises of some help, like Prime Minister Trudeau noted today, to secure some more weapons for Ukraine, but additional sanctions. I mean, is this enough? Or are these sanctions having enough of an impact?
Well, Canada is running in parallel with the rest of the world. You know, we've sanctioned as much as we can, and we've added a whole bunch more today. So I think that, you know, that's commensurate with everyone else. What we have provided from a military point of view, that's quite frankly a question for the politicians, because, you know, the Canadian Forces only has so much, and it's a function of how much they've been able to acquire over the last, you know, 10, 15 years. And if you aren't able to acquire it, you don't have it to share with other people. So I think that's where we are at a bigger debate, is on our defense policy. Is there enough money and enough capability in the defense force necessary to not only defend our nation, including the Arctic, but also to participate in NATO in a meaningful way? And I think right now we're fighting in a war. Maybe we could have done a little bit more.
And as Defense Minister Anita Anand has noted, our stock, our potential for more donation, that stock is running low. We have to leave it there. Major General and Tina, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Christina.